and thank you for joining me for another Traveler's Notes video. I just wanted to start off by thanking everybody for being here, for watching this channel, and showing up for me, and it really means a lot. I did take a break for a couple years from this channel, and I am catching up on comments, and I appreciate every comment that comes through, regardless of the content, because I know it helps YouTube a lot to pick this video out, but also because I know that my viewers are so brilliant. The comments are always so wise, and there have been some that I missed while I was gone that I recently discovered that have great questions that I want to cover, and there are comments that came in just recently that I want to cover, and I think that they all deserve their own video. So I'm going to be trying to make these Traveler Notes videos every week for you. I don't know if I'll be able to do that necessarily, but I'm going to try. I do have two young little ones, and they are sleeping through the night now, so I'm able to sneak away and make these videos while they're sleeping. But sometimes it's not so easy, and sometimes I get interrupted. So this is a learning curve for me, as it's always been. You know, I am an introvert, and I have autistic tendencies, and I'm dyslexic. So I've overcome a lot in my life. I'm very good at pretending to be an extrovert, and I'm very good at covering up the other disabilities that I have. I think that they are strengths in a lot of ways, and overcoming them have been really a blessing in my life, and not letting myself be limited by any type of label. In fact, I reject all labels for the most part. I use these as references to convey the ideas behind them, but I don't necessarily go around identifying myself that way or telling people these different labels, because quite frankly, I think that every person is unique and they're an individual. At the same time, I think we need labels and stereotypes because it's easier to reference. It's kind of like going into a library. You want to know where the New Age bookshelf is, opposed to just history, although I love history books. But there's a big difference there in a lot of ways. So I think references and labels and all that are actually a very good thing. I just don't ascribe to them personally, and I don't let them limit me. I think a lot of people kind of grab onto a label and then try to define themselves. I think that will be a great Traveler's Notes video to cover in a future video, or a future episode, I guess you could call it, on my channel. So, like I said, recently there have been some brilliant comments, and I wanted to cover one from MN, and it was regarding a question about what is Spargyics, which is a Greek word. It's the combination of the Greek spao and agrio. And spao means to tear apart, and agrio means to gather together. But MN actually shared the Greek, and he shared that it was I draw a pull for agrio. Oh, sorry, spao. I draw, I pull, and then agrio is I assemble. So it's very interesting that there's a difference. Now, the one that I quoted was actually from D.W. Huck's Sorcerer's Stone book. And so, hearing a different view of that, I know that different words can have different meanings, especially in Greek. So it was very nice to hear the different position. And MN went on to explain, the process from my standpoint seems to be, 1. Identify the prima materia within the self, as consciousness is the first matter. I totally agree with that. 2. Once identified within the self, draw out its nature to make it volatile. 3. Once volatile, fix it to the divine, though through an action that acts as a catalyst in the processes. 4. The outcome is part of the mind, is liberated from its attachment to the qualities and substances to which it wants to experience. So the person's spirit manifests through the personality as it has more levity in a volatile state. That pretty much sums it all up. I'm going to read it one more time because I probably made some mistakes. So the process from my standpoint seems to be 1. Identify the prima materia within the self, as consciousness is the first matter. 2. Once identified within the self, draw out its nature to make it volatile. 3. Once volatile, fix it to the divine through an action that acts as a catalyst in the processes. 4. The outcome is part of the mind, is liberated from its attachment to the qualities and substances to which it wants to experience. So the person's spirit manifests through the personality as it has more levity in a volatile state. So that is exactly the same conclusion I've come to after my journeys. And it's really interesting because I found this quote by Edgar Cayce that I had written down in one of my notebooks. The Edgar Cayce readings present the unique premise that the principal purpose for life in the earth is to bring divinity into the physical dimension. And so that's not the only purpose of life that Edgar Cayce actually recommends. He also says the purpose of life is to know thyself as yourself and one with the Creator. And if we think of the prime material as being consciousness itself, and that we're living in what Thomas Campbell calls a conscious living system. So basically, we're in the conscious mind of God. We're each emanations from that consciousness. And it is from those emanations that we're made in the likeness of the Creator. Not in our physical bodies, not in the material form at all, but in our soul essence, which if you read near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences, or if you have a past life regression, or you experience the in-between life state, which is basically out-of-body experiences, you're basically a floating ball of light that is capable of expression and basically telepathy. But it's a little bit different than that. Now, I have had experiences in that realm, and the energy is very different from what you have in this physical material reality. But if you think that we are just that consciousness, and in that consciousness, if you think of that ball of light, but you make it a lot bigger, that is God, the Creator, all that is Source. And then there's little creators in there too. And they're basically like little executives that run little different areas of the bigger mind of all that is Source, which a lot of people think they've come to that point, and then they find out there's more. I think it was in Bob Monroe's books. In one of them, he describes how he sees an endless amount of these realities existing. And so it is basically the multiverse. But the multiverse still exists within one singular consciousness that is all that is. And that is the glaring mistake, in my opinion, in most scientific theories, is the consciousness itself. In alchemy, the alchemists believed that their consciousness was as much an ingredient as any of the ingredients they used. Gold, copper, tin, any of that. The most important part was their consciousness, and they had meditation practices. They had a little hidden box with matter that they were working with, and they didn't show it to anybody else. And when they went into their own personal sacred space, they would meditate on the material that they were working with. And if anybody even saw it or really knew what they were doing, like the different ingredients in that box, they had to start over because the experiment was contaminated with someone else's imprint of consciousness. And if you look into Michael Newton's book, Journey of Souls, you'll actually find that it's exactly what souls do when they're creating. There's different souls that are capable of creating life. They create plants and things. So they start with their consciousness, and with their consciousness, they're directing their energy, and they're creating using the consciousness of Source. And there is, of course, two different parts of consciousness of Source. There is what is the feminine divine receptive energy, and then there's the masculine active energy. Now, since we are in the physical material reality, most of us consist mostly of the divine masculine active energy. We are actively engaging with the rest of consciousness, but there is an aspect that's always receptive. And those of us who choose to be women decide to be the receptive, nurturing aspect. And I do believe that's a soul choice prior to coming into the bodies. And that people have a lot of different reasons for choosing to be a woman or experiencing womanhood, but it is ultimately the nurturing, receptive energy of consciousness that is feminine. And those two aspects work together. So we, coming into the material reality, we experience both. And that is why on the path of the seeker and any spiritual path, you're balancing both the divine masculine and the divine feminine. Divine masculine is how you manifest, but if you're not in a receptive state, you're never going to manifest anything. You have to know how to enter that receptive state of meditation. So it's meditation is the receptive state, prayer is the active state. Those are the two things, and they go hand to hand in all the spiritual mysticism practices through all the religions and all the different spiritual practices, basically, as I've said. So the process of being spiritualized or spiritualization consists of being torn apart first. It's the Tower card. I always go back to the 7 cards of the Seeker in the Tarot, especially those first 2. You start off with the Devil card, which shows the Baphomet and the 2 people unchained. But they're able to remove those chains at any time. That's one of the things that Thursday Night Tarot Jason Lauderhan says pretty openly, is you can remove those chains at any time. You don't have to be chained. And it's not until the Tower card comes and their perception of life falls apart that people have those chains removed for them. Now the question is, are you going to put the chains back on, go back into that ignorant point of view, or are you going to go into the different world of being spiritualized? And so that process of tearing apart happens, and then we gather back together. But as Emma noted, what we really want to do before we come back together, so we want to separate that part that is the light, and that's the fermentation of the light. Is what happens is you ferment the light within yourself when you isolate it. And that fermentation, I know Paul Foster Case says that the process can happen in a year, but personally I think that it's a different process altogether. I do think it's the 7-fold path as opposed to the 12-fold path, which we're covering. Because once we hit Capricorn, when it comes back together, you kind of have this, the Devil card there. Capricorn is represented by the Devil card, and it really tells you that at that point is where you can choose to become spiritualized, or you can choose the 7-fold path, and it's the choice. You either become spiritualized or you go back to the way you've been. And it is every year on the annual cycle in the zodiac, we are torn apart. We're coming to Gemini season, where it's that tearing, and the 2 parts are isolated. And those 2 parts are typically the subconscious and the consciousness. And when we start working with the subconscious elements of the universal mind, all it is, the one thing, then we start to bring that into our consciousness, into reality. And if that's one of the purposes of humanity, is to bring that divine consciousness more and more into the earth, then that's the process you want to follow, correct? And I think that, personally, I'm of the opinion that we've hit the 100th monkey point. And the 100th monkey is where there was a scientific survey, I believe it was in Japan, a Japanese island. I want to say it was a Japanese island, where a monkey learned to wash her potato in the water. And then they watched as she taught a bunch in her tribe how to wash the potato. And then suddenly, when it hit enough monkeys on that island who'd learned to wash their potato, it jumped to other islands that there was no way the monkeys on that island got there. And so it basically proved that there is a collective consciousness. And so we had to hit a certain tipping point in the collective consciousness to have all of humanity awaken, basically. Whether they like it or not, people are awakening. I think everybody can see that the awakening process has happened. It wasn't just 2012. It wasn't just, boom, you're going to leave all the people that you hate and all the mean people in the world are going to be left behind. I pretty much rejected that kind of perspective. I think it's terrible. Terrible that you would want to leave somebody behind. I am not one of those people who would leave a soldier behind. I'm one of those people where I'm like, okay, come on, let's go. I'm going to drag you. I'm going to drag you with me. And when I first heard about the awakening back in 2005, that was my thought process. It's like, oh my God, I need to ascend so that I can drag all these people with me because it's so obvious to me how to do this. And I don't know why it was so obvious for me. I've had strange dreams that might answer that, and I've shared them in my blog. I've had strange experiences that I can explain that, you know, being spiritual can have its moments where it's really overwhelming, and sometimes you're making connections that aren't there, and sometimes you are, and there's a purpose for everything. I really believe there's a reason why we go through everything that we do. And yeah, so what MN said was perfect. You have this moment where everything is torn apart, and it happens in everybody's life. And I'm going to be doing a video specifically on how grief and trauma lead to the path of awakening and why that is, because I do think that is a very worthy subject, and I think that it's something that people need to know in depth. And I want to share my stories about that because I have gone through that myself. And in fact, one of the times that I went through that, I came across this book by Pema, I think that's Chodron, and it's When Things Fall Apart. I recommend this book if you're going through trauma of any type or you've been through it. It's just a very great book to read. So that is going to be an upcoming Traveler's Notes video. But I did want to share that I absolutely agree with that, and I wanted to share that comment because I want to make sure everybody saw it in some form, because it's so true. That is exactly it. Get torn apart, you withdraw that bit of consciousness, that light, that love that is the one creator within yourself, and then you ferment it and maximize it until pretty much that's the focus of your life. And for me personally, at this point, I can say that it is so worth it. I have this calmness, this sense of purpose, I can't even explain it. I just know things are going to turn out okay regardless. I am not a nervous person. When things happen, I see that they happen for divine reasons. I believe in the divine plan. In fact, that ties into astrology and predestination and free will. I didn't believe in astrology at first. I was not someone who believed in predestination at all. I was like so pro free will. Didn't want to hear about predestination. Predestination seemed depressing and terrible and yada yada. But after studying astrology and going so deep and far into it, because I was curious about the 7 planets and I was planning on making a video about the 7 planets, I discovered how true astrology is, to the point where there was transit recently. I think it was Venus square, I want to say Saturn, and I was just like, oh no. I had this fight with my husband. I was like, oh, it's just Venus square Saturn, it'll be over soon. And poof, it was gone. And I was like, there you go. You know, the first experience I had where I was like, wow, this astrology thing is real, was when Adam Ellenboss and David Palmer, the Leo King, both talked about the plague prior to 2020. And I knew something was going to come in 2020, but I didn't know what it was. And I remember, especially Adam Ellenboss, he was laughing as he was sharing about a plague during another Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. There was a dancing plague, and he was laughing. And I thought that was so funny. And then a few weeks later, the coronavirus comes out, and then it's like, oh my God, okay, this is a real thing. You know, and there's just been so much, you know, the world has changed since that time so much. YouTube has changed. Things are changing so fast. And I think they are going to change towards the better. Like I said, the light has already won. The 100th monkey has awoken, and consciousness is shifting, and it's shifting so fast that it's hard to keep up with. You know, we have the artificial intelligence, which is confirming some things that I'm sure it will confirm more, but confirms that no, the artificial intelligence is not the answer to the universe. We have people still exploding things, trying to, at minute levels, trying to find the prime material to create their own universes with, and they're never going to find it because it's consciousness itself. I think Thomas Campbell describes it as they keep finding things because the conscious system keeps providing them with things to follow, but they'll never reach that point because they missed the point that we are all part of one consciousness. And there is a divine plan, and there's no way that they could ever get a hold of anything to throw that divine plan off, to create things and harm things in such a way. And I do think that we all agree to certain experiences to help us awaken. I don't think anything has awakened people more than 2020. 2012 was a huge opportunity, but I think that was more of an excitement that carried some people and got us to the 100th monkey point. But we're now at a point where we are going into a different realm, a different, you could say, different timeline, the most unlikely of timelines. I think the likely timelines have all lapsed, and most of those were ones that led to World War III and self-destruction. And we're in a path where we're navigating narrowly through what could be World War III. We might experience to some degree, but I think so many people on this planet are awake, and so many people want peace, and so many people wish well upon each other, that we're not going to go into the full-blown experience that we had in World War I or World War II. I think just going into World War III on some level, doesn't matter how it happens, I think it will completely and utterly change the behavior of people, especially in the United States. I don't think they'll double down. I think they're going to be like, no. Let's find a peaceful solution. That's what we're supposed to stand for. And I really believe that we're in an escalation point, but we're going to get through this escalation point, and it will be downhill from there. It's building up, but once that build up finally releases, I think people are going to be like, whoa, we're not doing this. And that's just my sense of the energy, and based on where people are actually putting their attention as opposed to where they're not. Seeing people like Breaking Points with Crystal and Sagar and Russell Brand's Awakening show, seeing those blow up. I'd like to see more watch Ron Paul's Liberty Report. But those things have really taken off in the last few years. And the reason is because so many people are waking up to what's been really going on, which is an American empire. And I already shared before that I believe all the territories should be states in our country, because I don't believe in empires. I wouldn't support the Roman Empire any more than I support a pseudo-quiet, stealthy United States empire that we didn't learn about in high school. And we didn't learn about the territories in my high school, and I had advanced honor classes, so explain to me why that happened. I also had special education classes for math, but somehow magically when I went to college that changed, and I was able to pass math classes without problems to get my degrees. Either way, I digress. What I wanted to cover was that point and that wonderful comment by MN, and that perspective, and Spargyics. Excuse me, I don't really know Greek, so I apologize to all my Greek friends who are watching. I love Greece, love to go there. That was my dream vacation and dream honeymoon. Didn't get to go visit the islands, but someday I will go visit the Greek islands because they look absolutely gorgeous. And yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you. I went a little bit further and a little bit deeper than I meant to, and covered a few topics I didn't mean to, but there's a lot more to be covered and a lot of topics to cover further in other videos that I do want to share. And so once again, thank you for watching. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your subscribing. You guys are awesome. I'm so Happy to be here on YouTube and grateful to all of you. Bye for now.